Thank you to everybody for attending today. Let me first give you a little bit of a background to Sciforma and tell you a little bit about our origins. We've been around for nearly 30 years now, and we only concentrate on the PPM market, so that's the only thing that we actually do. We develop the software, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment. There's about 160 employees throughout the world with Sciforma, and we have approximately 1,000 customers. And our values are very much based on team spirit, a passion for innovation, and of course being very customer focused. From a technology point of view, we've also evolved over the years. So we started off with the first mouse-based Gantt chart on an MS-DOS platform. We then moved to Windows. In about 2003, we moved to a Java-based platform, and since then we've replaced all that with our latest technology, which is HTML5, which means that Sciforma is browser-based and available on most of the sort of major browsers. In terms of our support that we provide our customers, we have a presence in several different countries. So the software itself is developed in the US, in the Silicon Valley. We of course have our office here in the UK. We're based in between St. Paul's and Blackfriars. We have offices in France, Germany, Japan, Australia and the Philippines, and we also work with associates and resellers throughout the globe. The software itself is available in several different languages, which means that if you are rolling it out to different teams within sort of the Europe or across the world, you have the availability of the English language, German, French, Spanish, Japanese, Hebrew and Polish. We've won some awards recently. The latest award that we have won was with the Infotech Group, where Sciforma was recognised as the champion of in the mid-market high maturity category, and we also won their Value Award, and we're happy to share with you that study if you would like that, and you can just send us an email after the event to obtain that study. And we were also rated as a positive player in the Gartner Market Scope. In terms of our experience, we've implemented PPM systems for different industries, and we generally divide them up into 4 main groups. So the first group is customers that are managing industrial projects such as R&D teams, engineering teams. Typical examples here are Schneider Electric, a large company that I'm sure you've heard of. A part of Boeing is also using Sciforma. The second group is IT projects, so we generally find that IT teams have already got organised from a project management perspective because they're invoicing the business for the work that they're doing. So they've sort of needed to get project management savvy quite early on, and we have some examples that you'll recognise there. So Yorkshire Building Society based in Leeds, Sepura, a slightly smaller company based in Cambridge. The third group is professional services administration, so this is typically companies that are managing their client implementations, and they're managing their client implementations as projects. And then the fourth group, public sector project management, still projects of course, but it's managed in a slightly different way with different KPIs. I'm going to now hand over to Steve Kirk, who's going to carry on with the remaining of the presentation.
So yes, thank you, Rebecca. And with so many people on the call, I'm hoping that a few of you at least will have tried a triathlon or regular triathletes. But for those of you who are not, just to explain a little bit about what is a triathlon. It's basically a multi-event race. So you have 3 events, a swim, a cycle and a run. And the winner is basically the one who completes 3 consecutively in the least time. And they can vary in distance. The short ones can take an hour or so, or an hour and a half to complete, up to the famous Ironman, which is a 3.8k swim, 180k bike and a 42k run, so a marathon at the end of all that. And that can take anything from 12 hours to 15, 16 hours. So it's a fascinating sport, but the reason I'm talking about that today is because for me it's a very good analogy with how PPM tools and processes should be implemented in a project-based swimmer or the quickest cyclist or the runner, but one who is the best best on average at all 3, so in total. So it's the balance of the 3 disciplines which is important rather than being particularly strong in one or other of them. So PPM, we are talking about the three processes of projects, program and portfolio management. And my approach is that in a project-based organisation where you want to effectively introduce business change, you need to have these three processes working very closely together and working at a similar level of maturity. Just to quickly define what those are, so project management, how do we deliver the capabilities that we need in the organisation? Program management, how do we achieve our business objectives or our business benefits? And then portfolio management is about selecting the projects and programs that we need, which are going to help us meet our strategic objectives for the organisation.
So just to give a bit more detail about each one, just so we can just define what they are and what the requirements are for each of those disciplines. So our view on portfolio management is that it's the role of portfolio management is basically to answer the question, which projects and programs should we be doing? And this is to arrive on, excuse me, to come up with the best mix of projects and programs to meet the strategic goals of the company. And they can also, and that is within the context of deciding what resources we have, what skills we have within the organization, and how much risk we're prepared to take. So we need to come up with a process which will allow us to choose that mix, to relate it to those particular constraints, and then also on an ongoing basis to decide or to measure the success of that combination of projects and programs in meeting the requirements and the strategic goals of the organization. So with portfolio management, the question then is, okay, if you have a portfolio management process in place, how effective is it? And measuring the success of or the effectiveness of that process isn't straightforward. One way I would like to use to do this is to phrase this question to who I see as the customer of the portfolio management process, which is effectively corporate management. Corporate management is setting the strategic goals for the organization, and our portfolio management process should be allowing them to answer this question: am I confident that the strategic goals of the company I'm pursuing will be achieved? So this is the first question that I'd like to pass on as a poll question, because this is something I'd like to get your feedback on as to how, if you were in the position of your corporate management, how would you answer that question?
So 7% of the attendees said definitely, 78% of the attendees said most likely, and 14% said unlikely, and only 1% said not at all.
Very interesting. Thank you for your poll responses. And what's interesting is that I would suggest that is better than what we tend to see in the industry. My own view is that generally most organizations I've dealt with are quite poor in this area. I find that most companies have a very vague or no real understanding of portfolio management concepts, and certainly there are very few organizations actually have an organization structure which actually embeds the portfolio management within the organization itself. Very few with a structure that has anyone which is accountable and responsible for delivering portfolios of projects. What we do see, though, is a more ad hoc approach. So generally people tend to choose programs and projects on not such a well-defined process, but very much more on an ad hoc process, and just for selecting those projects and programs for various reasons which can change over time. So it's something that I think most companies I come into contact with would need to improve on. Congratulations to you who feel confident that you have that under control. So moving on to the next area, program management. And again, I think this is quite a well-defined process in the industry, but just to give my version or interpretation of what program management means, is again answering the question, how can we achieve our business objectives? So once we have our programs and projects defined within our portfolio, now we want to come up at the program level, come up with a process for delivering that and meeting those benefits and objectives which we've defined as critical. So sort of the attributes or features of program management. So the first thing is definitely a focus on benefits realization. With smaller projects, there should always be a business case, of course. There should always be a reason for doing it. But I think with programs, there is a greater focus, and we are spending more time in trying to identify and track and deliver against specific defined benefits. Generally, of course, programs are bigger scope, time and cost than an individual project. And so there are particular features of the process which will be required to make sure we can handle those. And of course, we also have interdependencies between the projects and the other pieces of work which are part of the program. And part of the program management process will be to track between those interdependencies to see how the completion of one project might affect the start of another, or how a piece of work might be a constraint on another piece. So there are specific features, specific things we need to do as part of program management to enable us to have this chain from the portfolio management down to program and project management. So to measure the success of your program management, again, taking the same approach as before, the question I would pose to who I see as the customer for the program management process would be, am I confident that the benefits I've identified in my portfolio will be realized? And in this case, I see the customer as being the portfolio manager. The portfolio manager is deciding what benefits and what programs and projects we want to carry out to do this. They want to be sure the program manager who is delivering it is going to meet and deliver those benefits. So this is our second poll, and I'd like to ask you to then feedback how confident you feel in your organization that the benefits you've identified will be realized.
So the results are 4% confirm that definitely, 53% most likely, 41% unlikely, and 2% not at all.
Okay, very interesting. And again, it's probably more in line with my own view on, or my experience with organizations I've worked with on this area. And what I've found is that I would say that most people are better at program management than portfolio management. They generally have a better understanding of the concepts of program management, but maybe don't have or only have a very limited organization structure for programs. So maybe don't have people with that particular role, but treated more as just as a senior project manager, just as a big project in effect. Which works to a certain extent, but there tends to be very few organizations have specific program management training, which focuses on some of the key disciplines that's required, such as we mentioned before, benefits realization and managing interdependencies. So I think it's better understood, maybe not executed quite as well as it could be. And then the third process we're talking about is, of course, project management. And with the experience of the people on this call, of course, I barely need to mention what we mean by project management. But just for completeness, the slides are there. Of course, we're more concerned there about answering the question how to deliver the capabilities we need. So there the focus is very much more on making sure we deliver outputs or deliverables within the constraints of time, cost and scope, and making a most effective use of the resources in the organization, and particularly, of course, having a process with strong risk management. So by managing risk, we can then be more consistent and repeatable. So again, to try and do a simple benchmark for our project management capability, in my view, in this kind of organization, the customer for project managers is going to be the program manager. So the program manager is going to be concerned about the delivery of the capabilities and other deliverables to meet and deliver the benefits. So they're going to be asking the question, am I confident that deliverables that I've identified in my program, my project, can be achieved? So that's how I would judge how well organizations carry out their project management. And this is, of course, the third poll. where I'll be asking you the same question. How would you answer that question in your own organization?
Results are in. 15% said definitely, 70% most likely, 14% unlikely, and 1% not at all.
So again, we're seeing a trend upwards there. So definitely, as we'd expect, project management as a discipline has been around for a reasonable period of time. And I think most organizations will have a very good understanding of the basic project management principles and concepts. And certainly most of the organizations we deal with have absorbed that into their company. They have an organization which is to a certain extent structured around projects. So you would expect, or I would expect to see people with the role of PM and generally have a project management office that will be providing support, training, and maybe some accountability for delivery of the projects themselves. And also, as it's seen very much as a career and as a role within the organization, there will be training, career development appropriate to give the PM the qualifications and experience they need to be effective in their role. So as we've seen in the poll, definitely PM is much more mature within most organizations in the UK at least. So now we've talked about the three components of our project program portfolio management process, and we've decided to do some simple benchmarking, see where we are. The key point now is how do we improve? And this is the approach I would take is there's nothing new, it's been around a long time, but I've yet to find a better way of approaching it, which is to identify or to categorize the activities we can do into processes, people, and tools, and then embed in that or embed it within a culture of continuous improvement, so that we are never satisfied with our capabilities, that we're always looking for ways to improve, and so which means we need to be continually measuring and monitoring how well we do these processes. For system processes, first thing we want, I think is key, is the very obvious one of documenting what we do. It still surprises me that I sometimes come across organizations who claim to know exactly how they manage these processes, but have nothing documented. And then, of course, when you start to drill into it and start to examine it, you find that different departments and different individuals work in different ways, and it makes it very difficult for those organizations. We need a starting point. We need to know where we are as an organization. So the first thing I would always ask clients or organizations to do is to document what they do. Then we've got a basis to start to standardize between different teams and departments, come up with a process which is repeatable, which can be easily communicated, and that everyone can see the same type of results. We need to standardize and simplify the process as far as possible to make it easier to follow and communicate. We have, of course, a good starting point with a lot of the industry standards that are out there. So the various bodies of knowledge from the various associations will give everyone a good point of reference. But I would certainly not insist people follow it to the letter. Generally, these methodologies are all designed to be configurable and customizable to a certain extent to suit the processes of the company. But it's definitely worth basing or referring to those standards at least as a guideline. Moving on from processes to people, once we have a process defined, key is to then communicate that to everybody in the organization. Make sure that everyone is aware of what they're expected to do, why they're doing it, and then making sure that any feedback about how it could be improved and so on comes back the other way. So communication, not a surprise that this is so key, but again, a lot of people haven't given it enough, haven't spent enough time working on the communication to make that effective. Training as well. It's a bit unrealistic to expect everybody to be natural project managers or program managers or portfolio managers. So it's important that there is sufficient training, professional training, and on-the-job training to allow people to develop those skills within the organisation. This, by the way, of course, is a good role for the PMO, so I would definitely look to the PMO to provide that kind of support. And the third part of the investment in people area would be on recruitment, and both for two reasons really. Firstly, it's a very quick way of getting those skills into the organisation if you don't have the luxury of time to develop your own staff to the level you need. So you can use recruitment to get the professional project and program managers that you want. And also I would suggest recruitment is to make some of these processes part of the job description. You'd want to ensure when you recruit individuals into the role that they understand what the role is and what the requirements are. The third part on tools, now this is really our main area, of course, as a tool provider. So we have a lot of experience in end users and customers on the use of PPM tools. And the first point I'd make is I think it's unreasonable to expect individuals in a PPM environment to try to manage their projects and programs with Excel and a simple planning tool. What they need is a purpose-built PPM tool which integrates together all the information they need and the processes to follow within one single PPM application. Selecting that PPM tool, the first thing we would need to be clear on is knowing what you want and prioritizing your requirements. So I think knowing what you want basically comes back to processes again. It's about having these processes documented and understanding what it is in that process you would expect to do in a tool, what you'd expect to be done maybe outside the tool or manually, and making sure that you also take into account that not every tool is going to necessarily meet 100% of those requirements and those needs. So prioritizing those so you can then at least make sure you're hitting the 80%. Then with moving on after selection to the implementation of the tool, the main point that I would make here is that it should be treated like any other business change project. It's no different from implementing an ERP tool or any other business application. You need to approach it with a well-defined process with a project team, well managed, and it still surprises me that for an organization to implement a project management tool that sometimes they don't approach it as a project in its own right. So I would say it's an important project. It's important to take it seriously and to manage it in exactly the same way as you would any other business change project. Moving on to support. So after you go live, then that's not the end of the story, of course. What we'd like to see is that after you've initially gone live and started to use your PPM application, is that you have a process for continually improving and enhancing how it's used. Generally, your requirements may change. Generally, there'll be other departments who may want to start to make use of the tool. So there may be some opportunities from the client side. But also from the supplier side. I mean, our product, like every other PPM tool, doesn't stay still. There's always new features, new extensions that become available. And so some of the capabilities which may were not available when you first implemented your PPM tool will now become available, and you have the opportunity to extend and expand its use. So those three areas of process, people and tools, there's some thoughts and ideas on how to approach those, but this should always be, as mentioned previously, in an environment of continuous improvement. So we need to have a process or a framework in place to track how well you are performing. Earlier on in the polls, that was a first approach, a very simple, sort of literally a straw poll approach to get some idea of how well or not you feel you do each of those three processes. I would suggest you want something a little more rigorous, a little more detailed. So adopting one of the maturity models, which are generally available from people like CMMI and other organizations, will allow you to then track and see how well you do each of those. And you can also use benchmarking. with other organisations or with standards to see again where your weaknesses are. In addition to the more formal approaches like that, as always, I'd recommend going back to the PM community. So there's always a lot you can learn informally just through exhibitions and seminars and so on about how other organisations perform. It's a good source for hints and tips about how we can improve and do things better. So don't neglect the informal channels as well as the more formal maturity and benchmarking models. Right, so just to summarize, I use the title for the slide here, Finishing the Race. Of course, you never really finish the race. As I said, with continuous improvement, the idea is that we're never satisfied, so we're always looking for ways to improve. But hey, it gave me a good excuse to use the photograph anyway. So what I would like to say in summary here is that we are looking for, first of all, consistent processes for all three disciplines. So we need to be sure it can be repeatable and consistent between departments, between different projects and programs. Investing in people, making sure that people have the right training, they're aware of what needs to be done, and you are recruiting the right resources to deliver these processes. And selecting and implementing the right tool to give company-wide support to the people and the processes. Giving the right people the tool for the job to make it easy as possible. And then, of course, as we said, continuous improvement in the search for a project-based organization so that we are able to deliver change consistently by balancing those three disciplines. Right, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Steve. Just to let you know, if you are interested in downloading the white paper that basically is sort of a description of what Steve just sort of presented with his slides, then please do go to the Sciforma website. The slides are available from the home page. You will see Steve's picture and the APM logo on the home page, and that's the area where you can click a button to download the white paper. And if you do have any other sort of further questions that you would like to ask us, then please don't hesitate to contact myself. You can see my name and my contact details on this slide. So do we have any questions to Lamar, please?
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, we've got some questions come through. The first question says, can you recommend maturity models to research or adopt?
Well, most of the PM organizations have various maturity models. We don't recommend any particular one. Any of the well-known professional organizations will have a maturity model. The one which has probably been around the longest, I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's probably been around the longest, is the CMMI maturity model, which I believe is a US-based organization, and that is certainly one which will be worth looking at. But I would, as I say, look at any of the different maturity models which each of the professional organizations offer.
Next question, what solution does Sciforma offer for program management?
We have a set of sort of what we call standard extensions, which enable you to decide which modules you want to sort of build for your solution. And we don't have a standard program management extension, but we do have something that we've configured ourselves for our UK clients. It's program management, something very, very popular in the UK. It's less so on the continent, we found. And so we've developed something for our UK clients which we can then use as a starting point. We've developed that based on the Managing Successful Programs framework, so we've sort of got the different notions from MSP in there, and then there would need to be some sort of additional tweaking for sort of individual companies to personalise that to the approach that they want to adopt. We are conscious that with any of these sort of frameworks, people adapt them to how much they need to do, as opposed to taking the whole framework and doing it in its entirety.
How does Sciforma proposal compare to the SharePoint 2013/MS project online?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm going to be really frank here. I think with all of these tools, there is much of a muchness. And I think we all do a lot of the same things, but we'll do them in slightly different ways. And I think what people need to get is a tool that best suits how they work. So if we're looking at SharePoint, that's obviously something that's online. Sciforma also is a SaaS solution. This is the only thing that Sciforma does. So we're completely sort of concentrating on PPM, whereas of course Microsoft is a solution that's well, there's several solutions within Microsoft. So I think we're definitely coming at it from a sort of user method point of view. The software enables you to use different methods, in fact. So we have a Prince2 extension, we have an Agile extension, we use critical chain, and that means that companies can sort of manage different types of projects according to different methodologies within the same system. I'm not sure to what extent sort of SharePoint and MSP enable you to do that. I certainly know that from a Sciforma point of view, we're also very configurable, so we sell off-the-shelf out-of-the-box solutions, but of course they can then be personalized, and the personalization capabilities are quite advanced for clients that need that to really adapt what we're doing to their organization.
Next question. Do you see a PMO being transitional?
I'm not quite sure what you mean exactly by transitional, but maybe I'm not answering the question, but my thoughts on PMOs are that there's generally, they fall into two types. There's a support type PMO, which is maybe supporting the use of the tool, providing training, providing support on processes. And then there's the PMO, which is more of a operational in terms of actually delivering the projects themselves. And I think both can be equally effective. I think, you know, which PMO you choose and how they operate really depends on your own organization and how and the culture that you work in. But I think PMO is definitely there. If the person who asked the question is thinking transitional in the sense that it's not part of the permanent organization structure, then no, I think it should always be there. I mean, there's always a requirement for PMO because, as we've seen, it should be a continuous improvement process. So there should always be new things for PMO to do to help to move the organization forward. So I hope whoever asked the question, I'm guessing that is what the question meant. If not, then yeah, please clarify that.
Thank you, Steve. We have seen before with Sciforma that portfolio management is well integrated, although there was nothing for program management. Is this to be included in a future version?
That's a good comment. So obviously there's somebody out there that's seen our sort of demonstrations. It's very interesting because a couple of weeks ago we were in Paris for our international symposium where we gathered together lots of different clients, and one of the UK customers sort of said we would like to sort of see some more program management within Sciforma, and that was really listened to by our sort of solutions team, and they asked for a show of hands to see who else in the room requires that, and that was also interesting because I think it allowed them to realise that there was a lot of demand for this. So as I mentioned earlier on, we do have a configuration that we are using with UK customers for this. It's not a standard extension per se, but we definitely are confident that that will become something more standard in the software that will be pushed from our corporate division, and it's something that we're starting to work on to get our different users together, so our clients essentially, for them to explain to us how they would see sort of program management in Sciforma. But we do have an interim solution, as I mentioned earlier, which is based on managing successful programs framework.
Thanks, Rebecca. I can confirm that we're now approaching the last two questions. Second from last, clarification. One of our PMO's tasks is to analyze data and make recommendations from a P3M perspective. What data do you see as being fundamental?
That's a very detailed question. I don't think I could answer that off the top of my head. That's something I think we'd have to get some more information and to think about that response. I mean, the key information that the PMO would need to see is the classics of time, cost, and scope, of course, and also tracking. I mean, most organizations, of course, have a RAID log, so you'd be tracking risks, assumptions, etc. And of course, benefits at the program level. Certainly, you know, benefit realization and benefit management is something that we're very keen to encourage, because I think that is the weaker link in program management at the moment. So I'm afraid, sorry, it's a bit of a general question, but I think to give you a detailed answer to such a detailed question, I need a bit more time.
Thank you, Steve. And last question, but not least, what are the main challenges you experience in implementing the system? Ownership, the need for discipline, for example, consistency of use across the organization, lack of leadership?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't joking when I said that it frustrates me sometimes that a lot of organisations don't treat a PPM tool as a core business system, which maybe we're biased. I mean, we're PPM vendors, so we would say this, but I personally see it as important in a project-based organisation as an ERP system or finance system. And you certainly wouldn't approach implementing those lightly. You know, you would make sure you have the right project team with the time available and the resources to do a good job. So we all know how to run successful projects. We all know how important commitment is, about having the right resources, people with the right skills, etc. And all I'd say is, you know, treat it like a project. Treat it as a serious project which requires project management rather than something which can be implemented quickly or, well, not necessarily quickly, but without that kind of commitment from